Welcome back, AP. All right, so we're going to pick right up where we left off in class. We're going to keep pushing ahead. We're going to have a full day of class coming in tomorrow, so we'll actually get time to review, go over some stuff, and really dive deep and crush as much stuff as possible, okay? So we will have one more flip going into your test, but it's not going to be a flip that I'm going to base any multiple choice questions off of. I'm going to base maybe one multiple choice set off of it, and then possibly like a short answer that you can choose to do if you so feel like, okay? But going into this whole thing, okay, you have to understand that Hitler and Mussolini had kind of a very specific program intended to garnering support for an ultra-right, very violent fascist movement, right? So we talked about restoring their masculinity with paramilitary groups. We talked about, like, we're now delving into the hows, right? Create some enemies. So we're going to talk about how, like, the Jewish population is going to be demonized by the Nazis and the Italians, as well as communists and other minorities. And we also discussed Kristallnacht, or the Night of Broken Glass. We talked about the Nuremberg laws, right? Now, really important question that happened, I think, but Rebecca Belanger asked me in class. She was like, the stars, you know, the stars that like signify that you were Jewish or not. That actually didn't begin until 1939 when Hitler invaded Poland, which we'll get to in this flip, right? So Hitler's goal in this entire thing when he's creating these enemies is a program that he called Volksgemeinschaft, right? Volksgemeinschaft means the people's community, which basically means he's trying to create a pure German race, right? Which is actually seen and signified by the Nuremberg identification charts, as well as the fact that Jewish people had to become registered within their cities, and that there was a list of German-approved names, and trying to create an ultra-hyper-nationalist far-right movement, right? So the big thing, though, on top of that, is Italy is going to mirror these things like I talked about in class. In 1938, they're going to issue the Italian racial laws, right? Now, this is the one that I know is just going to infuriate Malaya, but also they wanted to try and reduce the rights of women, right? They wanted to create only servile positions for women, which believed that their place was only in the home, to make them depend on a man's wages, right? So the big thing you got to understand is they're trying to reconvince or resume or push the entire idea that rights of women need to be rescinded back, right? Create only servile positions for women that believe their place is only in the home, which makes them depend on a man's wages. Because when the Great Depression actually hit, women were more likely to keep their jobs because they were paid less. This is going to create even more fractured masculinity issues, leading to a giant population of men that can be recruited by Hitler, by Mussolini, right? So this is a big part of the actually Frauenwarte, which means like women's work, literally is what this like thing means. And you see the man is the defender, the laborer, and the woman right here is raising a child, right? This is an Italian one that shows that a woman is actually the raiser of children and the raiser of fascist youth, right? So going forward, though, another big thing also is promising them work, right? Because they're not just disenfranchised veterans. They're not just fractured, emasculated men that have lost their jobs due to the Great Depression. They also need to be directly employed, right? So how do you employ men in your paramilitary groups in a labor service, right? That's what you're going to end up doing. So this created the actual Nazi labor forces, the fascist labor forces, and this right here, you can actually see that Mussolini created a huge amount of Italian fascist architecture that resembled ancient Rome and things like that. This is a reconstruction of an Olympic rink, of an actual like Olympic competitive ring. This right here is actually the spade of the Nazi workforce. And as you can see right here, the idea was like, give me your rifle, I'll give you a shovel, and we'll create government-sponsored programs where you will actually work, right? Now, the problem with this system was that it caused massive debt for the government, yes. But Hitler did promise to make the money back in future conquests. So even early on in Germany's fascist recruitment and the development of their fascist nation, based on the hatred of other people, another big way he's going to convince people that he is the proper way to go, which he's not, because he's evil, right? And he goes against basically every single Christian value that we ever actually teach at this school. This caused a massive debt for the government, yes, but Hitler promised to make the money back in those future conquests, right? So he's even talking about invading areas of Europe early, right? Also, another big one, indoctrinate the youth, right? Create youth organizations to teach your hateful ideology at a young age. This, for example, is a picture of the Hitler Youth, and over here is a picture of the Italian Youth, right? So let me get a timer going really, really fast. Really, really quick. Hold on. So, but continuing forward, this is a picture of the Italian Fascist Youth. So as you can see, indoctrinate them young, indoctrinate them early, and try to create organizations that will create the idea of this fascist person or fascist soldier that you're looking for, right? Now, also, though, there are other methods, right? There are other minor methods that we will talk about. We will discuss some propaganda films in class. We're going to watch a clip from The Triumph of the Will, which is actually one of his main pieces of propaganda filmography, which is actually right here. And I don't even know if the link itself actually works. Oh, it does. All right, so but as you can see, use the video. Oh, it's been removed. Okay, well, it makes sense because it's a propaganda film of Hitler. I'm kind of glad that they removed it. Now, anyway, so really quick though, going forward. All right, there. Oh, bring in the blue dot. Bring in the blue dot. Where you at, blue dot? Where you at? There. Okay. Here we go. Now, got it. All right, so here we go. Now, you also have propaganda, which is there's two types of propaganda. There's positive propaganda and negative propaganda. Positive propaganda usually tries to create positive feelings about an individual, but he also used film, and Hitler also used radio. This actually right here actually says the people's radio, right? Volksempfänger, right? So Empfänger, is the actual people's radio that Hitler would oftentimes do broadcast through, right? Negative propaganda also was a very major attempt, like Nazi book burnings, for example, or burning anything that was a negative connotation towards Germany. For example, one of my favorite books was actually burned en masse in Germany, All Quiet on the Western Front, right? Also, there's another big one, too, that really creeps me out. There's this idea, okay, and it's called Kraft durch Freude, right? Kraft durch Freude literally means strength through joy. So on top of having propaganda that demonized other people and spread a hateful message, Hitler would also encourage people to go on holidays and vacations. He would give them things, right, to try and create a sympathy and a sympathetic eye towards the Nazi government. As you can see, this is a women's Nazi aerobic class, and you can see the swastika on their dress, and they're actually trying to create this strength through joy program, which is terrifying. It is terrifying to believe that a man that this harsh and this evil actually encouraged loyalty by trying to be nice to one group while being evil to the other. This right here, for example, is a pin from a vacation that somebody actually went on in Nazi Germany. And then this also is a very, very famous one. That right there is the Volkswagen. Yes, the Volkswagen, the people's car, right? That company was actually invented under Nazi Germany. So was Fanta. Fanta was actually created for the Nazis as well. So that is how they recruited people into their organizations, right? But now we have to kind of shift gears, and we talked about the growth of fascism in Germany and Italy, but now we have to shift gears and we have to discuss the growth of the communist totalitarian state within Russia, right? So Stalin is going to take a different approach, right? Stalin's going to take a different approach, and he is going to look to become what is known as the man of steel, right? So Stalin is coming off the heels, as we know, of Vladimir Lenin. Vladimir Lenin is going to die in, in 1924, right? So now under Vladimir Lenin, he had this program known as the NEP, also known as the New Economic Policy, right? Now, the New Economic Policy is the constructed idea that basically, in a nutshell, the creation of a Russian state that has communist idealistic backings, and they're fused with capitalist undertones, right? They're fused with capitalist constructs and ideas of capitalist trade, right? Because Lenin was fully aware that his idea of making the entire world communist wasn't going to happen. So he resorted to a construct known as socialism in one country, right? Where basically inviting capitalism within and externally of the borders, you would then be able to tax people at higher rates and create a true socialist system underneath your government. Now, regardless of this, they still were left in a lot of debt, right? Lenin died in 1924, and he turned on Trotsky. Stalin did. Stalin immediately turned on Trotsky and tried to force him out and align himself with party leaders because he has plans to pick up where the New Economic Policy left off, right? And actually, inside the Red Square, Inside the Red Square in Russia, even to this day, you can actually go see Vladimir Lenin's body because it's preserved and stuff in a big glass coffin like Snow White. All right, so now, anyway, but after this all happens, he decides to turn on Trotsky, push him out, and he ends up getting him exiled out of Russia. Now, he tries to attack two major issues. When Stalin comes to power as of 1928, he tries to attack two major issues. One, unemployment. Two, famine, right? So famine had to be solved due to the fact that there was a mass effort under Lenin to collectivize agriculture, right? To create giant state-owned farms and to strip land and money away from these people known as kulaks, right? Kulaks are middle-class farmers that owned land in Russia and actually profited off of their labor. Now, this was demonized by the communist state, and this would be part one of what Stalin would call his Great Purges, right? So the first one, his Great Purge part one, was basically to literally strip land, strip money, and execute middle-class farmers, which is ridiculous in his first part of his Great Purge, and it actually was a huge backfire, right? So he executed the kulaks and actually took their land and their money away from them in his first part of his Great Purge, and this is going to backfire on him tremendously, and the famine is going to get much worse, and 10 million are going to die due to this famine as a result, right? Part two of the Great Purge was to blame his own Bolshevik party for this plan, right? So he then turns on the Bolshevik leadership and says that it's not my fault and it's not the fact that we executed the kulaks why we're not making as much food. It's actually y'all's fault. And that turned into the opening of the gulags, right? A gulag is a Russian labor camp, right? A Russian labor camp that resembles much like a Russian concentration camp, right? Where basically political prisoners are sent to work themselves to death, oftentimes making big rocks into smaller rocks. This is a picture of the gulags as well, and you can see men starving to death. This is a great picture to show you Stalin's regime in the second part of his Great Purge when he turned on the Bolshevik party and started to purge them out of his society. So as you can see in the original picture, there are 3 men surrounding Stalin. And then in the next year's picture, it's only 2 because this guy's been doctored out of it, right? And then in the next year's picture, that man has been doctored out of it. And in the final picture, he has been doctored out of it. Why is this? Because all these people would be executed during Stalin's second part of his Great Purge when he turned on the Bolshevik leadership, right? Now, under Stalin, he also tried to solve unemployment in the industrial sector by hyper-industrializing, right? And this was a giant component of what is known as his 5-year plan, right? So his 5-year plan was to try and build as many factories as possible in 2 spurts of years. From 29 to 30 and from 31 to 32, they would actually create as many jobs as possible by building up factories and creating cities that existed around them, right? So basically, he would stamp a huge factory in one spot and build a city around it to provide jobs and living areas for those people. Now, the big one is Stalingrad, which had a massive tractor plant there. Then there's Magnitogorsk, which has a huge steel plant there. And then there's another one, the Ural coal mines, right? The Ural coal mines is going to be a big one as well. And the thing about that is that they're going to create these towns around them to try and force the industrialization of Russia. Now, this is going to build up cities, yes. But the big thing about it is he wanted to mass employ workers, and yes, it's going to increase production to over 150%, but the downfall of the 5-year plan is you still had famine on your hands, and you were still executing kulaks, and you also were creating just a huge working class that was then going to, again, need to be propped up by the socialist government, right? So that right there is the 5-year plan under Stalin. Now, meanwhile, in the East, yes, there's a 4th group we haven't even brought up because they are not fascist nor communist, okay? Japan is a whole other different scenario, and we will gloss over them really quickly. Japan, what the heck, man? Japan is going to invade Manchuria, also known as Northern China. Okay, so Northern China is where Manchuria is, in 1931 for its natural resources to supply their new factories. Now, 1931, some of you are like, I thought Japan already had a stake in Manchuria due to the Russo-Japanese War. You're not completely wrong, okay? They did have a stake there, but they wanted direct ownership and control of it. They wanted to bring it into their empire, not just a sphere of influence, right? Just like they had already done with Korea. Now, there was no declaration of war issued whatsoever, and Japan just attacked. When the League of Nations tried to come down on Japan and said, you cannot do this, you cannot just attack civilian targets without with an unprompted declaration of war. Japan is going to leave the League of Nations, right? This showed the downfall and the weakness of the League of Nations, and another big reason why the Americans never joined, okay? Why they're going to do this is because it's under the advisement of their two main leaders, okay? The first one, the God Emperor Hirohito, right? So Hirohito, okay, the God Emperor himself, is going to be led by this man, Hideki Tojo, okay? So it's important that you know that both of these men were leading over Japan. The Hirohito as their emperor, Hideki Tojo as their war minister and war leader, right? Now, the Nanjing massacre is going to be a massive result of this as well. And in 1937, the Japanese military is going to swarm into the city of Nanjing, which is actually in northern China, and lead a massacre of people that resulted in anywhere. We don't know for sure how many civilians were killed, but it was a massive purging genetically of trying to assault women, killing of children and women, killing of elder populations, and we don't know how many people were killed in the Nanjing massacre, but we know it was anywhere from 40,000 to 300,000 people when they invaded this one particular city. Now, these areas is where Japan is going to try and create their new extension of their empire and invade the weakened China following the imperialism that they were under by the Europeans. Now, some of you are like, man, we are covering some stuff today. Yes, we are covering some stuff today. We're trying to get after it, right? So now that they have support, okay, now we're jumping back over to Europe, right? So we're now going back over to Europe and getting into the 1935 territory. Germany and Italy are going to begin to push back on the Treaty of Versailles barriers, right? The Treaty of Versailles put up a lot of barriers saying you can't do this, you can't do this, you can't do this to Germany in particular, right? It didn't really create any restrictive barriers on Italy. However, Italy is still going to provocate some things and create some issues when they invaded and conquered Ethiopia in 1935. Why did Mussolini do this? Because the Italians failed to invade Ethiopia and got beat by Ethiopia during the late imperialist period in the late 1800s. So why would a fascist dictator invade the place that you failed to invade in the first place? Masculinity, the fractured masculinity, encouraging the fascist Italian pride, right? So that's a big thing that you need to remember. Now look, in 1935, you have to understand that the Treaty of Versailles says Germany can only have an army of no more than 100,000. No more than 100,000. That's it, right? The draft in Germany would be banned. You are not allowed to have an air force whatsoever, and you're also not allowed to have a fully functional navy. So no submarines, Germany. And if your navy exists, it is going to be very small. Well, in 1935, Hitler begins to bring back the draft. He makes his army of over 500,000. 13 million Germans would actually serve in World War II. Hitler's going to create the Luftwaffe, which is the German Air Force, and he's also going to build up the Navy. So he's directly violating the Treaty of Versailles in 1935. And the Allies do nothing. And in 1936, the Treaty of Versailles says the Rhineland is to remain a demilitarized zone. To give you a reminder, this is the Rhineland. This is the border between France and Germany. And this area was to remain free of German military movement, especially in this area known as the Ardennes Forest, all right? Hitler remilitarizes the Rhineland. He puts an army in the Ardennes Forest. And then in 1938, the Treaty of Versailles says Germany must respect Austria as a country and must give them full autonomy and not create any diplomatic ties with them, especially wartime alliances. So Hitler annexes Austria and brings them into Germany in an event known as the Anschluss in 1938. So he just annexes Austria and just sucks it right into the German, in creating a bigger Germany. He then proceeds to go into Austria and raid it for its material wealth, right? What the heck? Why? Why are the Allies doing nothing? It's because of the strategy that they're practicing. They're practicing a strategy known as appeasement, okay? Which is the policy of conceding to prevent war, okay? The thing you have to understand is that the Allies were letting Hitler do this. They were allowing him to do this, okay? Allowing it. fine with it, okay with it, because he believed that they were the spineless leaders of democracy and they weren't going to stop him. And the worst part about it was he was right, okay? Hitler then annexes this place known as the Sudetenland in 1938, after he annexes Austria. The Sudetenland is all this stuff in Burgundy. Why did he want this little weird part of Czechoslovakia? Because he said some Germans lived there, right? So he annexes this area, and the Allies give in again. And they sign this thing known as the Munich Agreement, saying, it's okay, Hitler, you can annex that area of Czechoslovakia. And at this meeting, and at this, this entire Munich Agreement, known to Czechoslovakians as the Munich Betrayal, they allowed Hitler to do this. And they did nothing. And then 1939 rolls around, right? Hitler then annexed the remainder of Czechoslovakia, the rest of the country, and has now doubled his country in size, right? The Allies still did nothing. They wouldn't do anything until September 1st, when an unannounced Germany invaded Poland using the Blitzkrieg method, right? So on September 1st, 1939, World War II would begin because Germany invaded Poland using their Blitzkrieg. And we're about to talk about what the Blitzkrieg is here in about 2 seconds, okay? France and the UK finally declare war in 1939 as of September 1st, the second a German boot steps foot into Poland, right? So when this occurs, the U.S. and the Allies now come entering into the war. However, the first phases of the war are a dramatic Axis victory, right? So in the European theater, the Axis powers, known by their tripartite pact in September 27th, 1940, when they actually created this thing. So it was Germany, Italy, and Japan, right? That is your Axis powers. The Allies are France and Britain, but what about Russia? Why is Russia, or the USSR, also known as the Soviet Union now being led by Stalin, who is purging people left and right, why are they not in the alliance? Why is France and Britain alone in this alliance? Well, it's because the Nazis and the Soviets signed this thing known as a non-aggression pact on August 23rd, 1939, right? The Nazi-Soviet non-aggression pact created a set of provisions, right? And the provisions that Stalin and Hitler made together, which I know Malaya knows about this because I know you referenced it one time in class. The provisions were to split up Poland and Eastern Europe, to trade German industry goods for Russian grains, and don't aid either enemy in the side. So they are to stay uninvolved against. So basically the Soviets are not allowed to aid the British or the French in any way, right? And the Nazis will not aid anyone against the Soviet Union. Now there's a big reason why this happened. Because the Soviets had a plan. They wanted to go fight a different war, right? So the Soviets were in the middle of a different war. This freed them up to go fight Finland in this thing known as the Winter War, right? And the Soviets come in, rush into Finland, and regardless of losing a heavy number of people and a heavy number of armaments, the Soviets take over the eastern area of Finland in this Winter War and end up winning, right? And the U.S. remains neutral, right? So did the Axis learn from World War I? Did these guys learn that World War I was fought so poorly, and that's why the Central Powers lost? You bet they did. The Axis realized to prevent the two-front war, sign that Nazi aggression pact with the Soviets, right? Now you can focus your entire force on France and Britain. And they also wanted to prevent a trench war. So they adopted this thing known as the Blitzkrieg, right? The Blitzkrieg is known as the Lightning War, right? That is what it means in German, okay? To avoid a stalemate of trench warfare, the Axis powers used heavy machinery-based attacks, right? The Luftwaffe, known as the German Air Force, tanks rolled in an immediate invasion, and they went aggressively and quickly, hence Lightning War, right? And this is going to devastate the Allied armies, and it's going to devastate their civilians' ability to fight this war and keep producing war materials, right? Because now the German Luftwaffe has single propeller, not turbine powered, but single propeller planes that can travel further distances. They're more maneuverable. They have fighters and long-range bombers, right? So the Blitzkrieg is extremely effective, mainly due to practice, right? Because the Germans and Italians had already used this. So something we didn't talk about that I'm just bringing up briefly is that the Spanish Civil War lasted from 1936 to 1939 when a fascist dictator by the name of Francisco Franco used his military to attack and take over his own country, right? And the Germans and the Italians aided him by using their blitzkrieg tactics. So when World War II began, the Germans and the Italians already knew how to use the blitzkrieg, and they went after them, right? And it causes not only psychological damage, but also physical damage, right? And you have to understand that in the Eastern... Nah, we're going to move on with that. They're still invading China. All right, so now, anyway, so don't need to write that last one. But what Hitler's goal is this concept known as Lebensraum. Lebensraum is living space, okay? He believes that he needs to grow the territorial gains of Germany and give it to the German people because he believes that Germans need more room, right? Because that they are too densely populated. So he wants to take over more area and repurpose it for German people. So the Germans are going to use the blitzkrieg against Norway and Denmark. Then they're going to use against France, Netherlands, and Belgium. And they're going to overwhelm their unmobilized forces, okay? But in May 1940, a big thing happens. And Winston Churchill is going to be elected as the Prime Minister of the United Kingdom. Churchill, as Prime Minister of the United Kingdom in 1940, he offered and brought in an Otto von Bismarck-like character. And he says, I have nothing to offer this position but blood, toil, tears, and sweat, right? And he is credited with being the guy that kind of lifted Great Britain through the war, right? Kept them mobilized, kept them aggressive, and kept their factories running. And he had been speaking out about the rise of Hitler the entire time, right? He actually was a member of parliament all the way back in the First World War, right? And a part of the War Commission during the First World War. And he was an experienced politician. He was a soldier himself and was a phenomenal wartime leader. Regardless of his politics, because some people believe that he was politically less inclined, I disagree. I think he was the right person to lead Great Britain during this war, right? So Germany overwhelms France, though, okay? So the plan is the Germans want to do like the Schlieffen Plan oriented. Knock France out as fast as possible. So they rushed in and they managed to corner an entire British regiment and the entire French regiment behind this thing known as the Maginot Line, which we'll talk about in class, right? So they overwhelmed the French forces at the Battle of Dunkirk, right? And then that led to this thing known as the evacuation of Dunkirk. Because as you can see, Nazi troops using their blitzkrieg methods herded the entire French military forces in northern France, which Dunkirk is in Normandy, right? And they want to set up and create a battle line across the entire coast to protect themselves from invasion by the British, right? They overwhelmed the French forces, but then all of a sudden, they just stopped, right? They set up a perimeter around this area, and the British managed to evacuate the massive, unprepared French army, right? So the German military came in and the German military came in and fought off this unprepared British and French army. And the British are going to evacuate 360,000 troops off the beaches of Dunkirk in northern France. And they're going to use not only naval vessels, but they're going to even use civilian fishing ships. It's known as the Miracle. Now, the weird thing was this Hitler's plan? Did he want to let them leave? Did he plan to let them leave? Because nobody really knows, because all of a sudden the invasion just stopped. It just stopped. He had the French where he wanted them, and he just stopped invading. Now, was this his plan to evacuate this large division of French troops, over 360,000 of them, to isolate them in Great Britain and create this defensive territory? We don't know. Some people say it was a blunder and that he should have kept attacking. Some military historians do anyway. But following the evacuation at Dunkirk, or the Miracle of Dunkirk, right, Germany and Italy are then going to invade France, okay? But I'm talking the northern area of France to try and get to one key city, the place they could never take in World War I. You know it is Paris, right? So Britain was unable to assist them, fearing devastating losses during this invasion. So the Nazis are going to push south from Dunkirk, right? So if we look right here, Dunkirk is actually located in this right here. They push south directly at Paris. And on June of 22nd, 1940, the Nazis forced the French to surrender. That's right. France was out of this war. As of June 22nd, 1940, there is only one ally remaining. It's Great Britain. It's Great Britain. That's the one, right? But there's a massive difference, though, as you can see on this map. This is Vichy France, and this is northern France. The Vichy French refused to aid the French military. They withdrew their forces. They allowed the Nazis to take Paris because they entered into an agreement with Hitler that they would refused to fight them. So the south of France allied with the Nazis and the Vichy government. A lot of Vichy French soldiers would even fight with the German troops in World War II. And that now only leaves one ally. And Russia is in Hitler's back pocket. So we'll talk about what these implications mean in the next class, but I'll see y'all then. Y'all have a good one.